neither of us knew this stuff when we got out of school.
No.
It's, you kind of bumble through it. You know, you get a loan and you're like, well, why are you giving me all this money for so cheap? Well, it's because
banks are really anxious to lend you money if you're good. If you're not good, they don't lend you money. So again, it goes back to when somebody says, I don't have money, it's because you don't have you don't have education. You know, stuff like this and this and this. You go, well, I don't have money, so I don't start. Well, you're not supposed to use your own money anyway. And that was my rich dad's lesson to me back in the 70s. He says, look, the dollar is no longer backed by gold. The dollar is now backed by debt, U.S. Treasuries. And he says, if you're going to be rich, you better understand how to use debt. Meanwhile, the other people, the other financial people, oh, save, 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 and put your money in the mutual funds. Would you do that?
No, as a matter of fact, if you think about it, the whole system is designed to use bank financing. I mean, you know, all these people that are working so hard are actually putting all their money into the bank. Well, those deposits are a liability. They're an expense to the bank. So if you put money in the bank, it's an expense to the bank because they have to pay you interest. So they have to lend it.
Yeah, so let me draw a diagram here. It's the process. Those who read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, you know there's income statement and balance sheet. So when you put your savings over here to the bank, it's their liability because they got to pay interest on it.
Right.
So what they want to do is move this over here.
Right, and that's what they do.
And so this is where Ken shows up and says, thank you very much.
It's the same thing with a life insurance company or a pension or even a 401k. That money gets invested. So whatever, you know, that's why these financial planners say save, save, save. You know why? Because they want your savings. Those savings that people put in the bank, this is all people, gets invested. And so we're asking you guys to be over here. And you can do this.
In other words, if this is a bank or a mutual fund company or whatever it is, the moment you put your savings in here or you put your 401k to the bank, it's a liability because they're now responsible for it.
Right.
And they've got to move that money over here. The only way they can move that is by debt.
Correct.
So Kenny goes up there to the insurance company, a mutual fund company, and he says, can I have some money? I got this business, I got this huge project over here, I need to move it. And today, the big problem is you guys have too much money, right?
That's right. There's so much money in savings. If you just Google what consumers are saving now, you're going to see that this is at a very, very high point right now because of the recession. It was a very low point beginning of the recession, and now it's very, very high. And so that's why interest rates are low. That's because they're trying to lend it out so much. And again, it's just a supply and demand thing. Because there's so much money in savings that it's so competitive that rates are low.
Right. So this is the strange part. This is the bank. Your savings are their liability. But if this is you, your savings are your asset.
Right.
That's why it's called a balance sheet. So the reason my rich dad says I had to learn how to, you know, invest in real estate and get comfortable with it, start the process, was because I needed to borrow this money out. Whereas the other financial advisors say, keep your money over here. To me, this is really stupid, especially since he is printing, what, 75 billion
well, that's
a month?
the thing. I mean, why would you save money right now? You should be using that money and putting it into investments that hedge inflation.
Yeah.
That's the only way to make money in this next few years.
Yeah.
Right, and what's interesting is neither of us knew this stuff when we got out of school.
No.
You kind of bumble through it. You know, you get a loan and you're like, well, why are you giving me all this money for so cheap? Well, it's because they need to lend it out. So different institutions have lots of money, and their job is to place it. They place it in business, lines of credit, real estate, and all kinds of other investments.
And they love real estate.
They do love real estate.
So think of it this way. If you're a banker and your savings and your 401k are here, the bank's in trouble.
Right.
Because they've got to pay you interest on it.
Right.
And they don't want to pay you interest. So let's say they're paying you 1%, they're going to lend it out at 5%.
Right.
That's how money is made.
That's how they make money.
And that is the game of money.
There's no stopping this flame, cause I came to the game and I changed it to play how I like, rearranged it to my own domain.
Okay. ROI stands for return on investment. So when guys tell me I'm getting an 8% ROI, I'm going, geez, that's chump change. And why would you work for 8%? That is so low. Today, guys are happy to get 5%. I mean, 3%. So this is the point here, the more debt you use, the higher your ROI. It is so counterintuitive to what people are thinking. So let's say I have 100% debt. My first property was $18,000. I put $2,000 down with a credit card, and I was making $25 a month.
I think that's the best example, Robert, because essentially what you did was you didn't use any of your own money. So the only costs that you had was whatever your debt was and whatever it cost the $1,800 on your credit card was.
Right. So I mean, but the idea was not to make money. The idea was to train my mind to think that I want 100% debt. Most people, I want to get out of debt. I want to get out of debt. I want to get out of debt. And what we're saying here is the debt pays all your expenses and gives you some income. That's really as simple as it gets. So we started with this. So if I have no money in the deal, it's 100% debt, and making $25, what is my return on investment?
It's infinite.
This.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you basically have no investment and you're making $25 a month.
Yeah, no money in the deal. It's just knowledge going into the deal. Now, I learned a lot on that process, and it wasn't all hunky-dory. But today, this is what we're doing. The difference is today, how much money do you think you borrowed last year?
We probably borrowed $80 million.
In debt.
Yeah.
And anyway, we'll go. Eventually, your goal is to have 100% debt, right?
Yeah. So the reason why we want so much debt is because if I'm borrowing right now, I'm borrowing at say 4 or 4.5%, and inflation is say 4.5%. Then I'm using basically your money, pension fund,
mutual funds, savings.
Insurance, savings. I'm using your money to hedge inflation and buying assets. So that's how the system works, and that's how the wealthy get really wealthy.
So this is what we teach people. The whole part here is you have the power to do it. I mean, anybody can do this. Anybody can. Well, this is today, but there's still deals. There's many deals around.
Well, you think about it.
Small deals.
Yeah, but I mean, the most obvious are using bank debt to buy a home.
But it's not even that. It's how you think about it. You see, the best thing about doing those 100 deals is I was learning to think about debt is good. As long as you have in your mind that debt is bad, I want to use my equity, your ROI goes down.
That's a good point. And there is bad debt, of course. Bad debt would be credit card debt, or it could be,
if it was costing me $25.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, so there's definitely debt that you don't want to get into. But we're talking about debt that's paid by a tenant. Yeah. Debt that's paid off by somebody else. So that's a really important point. So if you're borrowing money, you're going to want to make sure that you have the rent to cover it.
So years and years ago, Kenny came to us when he was getting started on this infinite return type of thing. Was it
Edgewood?
Edgewood. Can you tell us a little about that deal real quickly?
Yeah, so that property, it was
once again, if I hadn't done this myself, I would not understand what Kenny said.
It was a 144 unit property that was existing it was 95% occupied with tenants. So that was an important piece. And then next door it had another 10 acres. And so the deal is that I was going to build a second phase on the 10 acres, and then we were going to have one property that was 256 units. And so that's what we did. So we took the first 144 units and the land, and we went to the bank, and we got a construction loan to build the second phase. And then we built the second phase, and through good management, we filled up the property, and then we went back to the bank and we refinanced the whole project and got one loan on it. So we used debt to build it. We used debt to take out that construction debt.
But this is the way it looked for Kim and I. We're one of 4 investors in that deal, something like that. So what we did was we had this property, Edgewood,
Yep.
and it was pumping about 300,000.
Yeah.
So Kim and I, every year, were receiving $300,000
And cash flow from the tenants.
income, most of it tax-free
Yes.
because of depreciation and all that, all those things you have to learn. So $300,000 for most people is a lot of money. The problem was Kim and I had, I think, 1 million in it, right?
Yeah, I think so.
We had 1 million equity in it. So what Kenny did is when he refinanced it, he gave us our million back. So Kim and I got all of our $1 million back, right?
Yeah. Through a refinance.
And we still had this.
Right.
So we were receiving 300,000 with no money into a deal. To me, that's a great deal.
Yeah, and people might ask how. So
Well,
there's a lot of things that happen inside of here. One was that this was over a 5 or 6 year period. The rents had gone up. We had increased the value, and during that time, interest rates went down. If you remember, I think we borrowed the original at somewhere around 7%, and then we refinanced somewhere around 5%. So we actually saved on the loan, on the interest rate of the loan, and so what we had a property that was worth a lot more, and it still cash flowed very close to what it cash flowed before, and we got the $1 million out, and the $1 million was tax free because it's a refinance. So when you pull money out from, when you put a new loan over an old loan and you pull that money out, that's tax free.
So with that $1 million, we gave it back to Kenny, another deal, money, same process, goes out, goes out, goes out, and now it's huge.
Yeah, it's what we call the velocity of money. So now at that point, Robert and Kim were still in the deal. They were still cash flowing, and then that $1 million was also at work somewhere else. It's a long-term strategy. It's not for flippers. It's definitely based on cash flow. People come to us and say, "Do you want to sell? Do you want to sell?" And the question is why would we? Because it's producing all this cash flow and we have no investment. So all it would do is create a taxable event. So
we don't want the money, if you understand that.
Right. Yes, there's millions of dollars in equity in the project, but we're not interested in that. We're interested in the cash flow. It's a big difference in the way we think.
Yeah, we want this here.
That's right. We want the monthly and annual recurring cash flow into our own bank accounts.